Hi everyone, this is Matt. Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk to you about breaking into medical writing because I'm a regulatory medical writer and some of you asked me about this, about how to break into medical writing, and this is why I want to cover this. So if you are one of these people, then you've probably read quite a few job descriptions for medical writing roles and you've seen that employers often are looking for someone with a PhD. Okay, it's not an essential thing to have, but they would like you to have a PhD. So now if I think about the team I work with, so I work for a contract research organization, and I think there is about 100 of us medical writers all in all working within the company. And I can tell you that probably about half of us do have a PhD. So it is very common to have a PhD. However, if you are one of those people without a PhD, maybe you have bachelor's or master's, it's still absolutely fine. You can still break it into medical writing. However, it's much more rare to break into medical writing straight after uni if you only have master's or bachelor's. However, it's possible, and I know a couple of people who have masters and straight after the masters they broke into medical writing. That's definitely possible. But what most people do is that they get a job within the company and then they move internally to medical writing positions. So a lot of my colleagues actually used to work within my company as scientists, bench scientists, as QC auditors. Some of them worked within publishing, so document services, these kind of jobs. And then eventually at some point they decided to internally move to medical writing, and they managed so successfully. However, this brings us to the next point, which is your writing portfolio. So a lot of you asked me whether you would need a writing portfolio before you apply for a medical writing job. And the answer is no, you don't. And that is simply because when you apply for the job, the hiring manager will ask you to provide a piece of writing. So they will most likely give you some information to describe, and I already released a video on this. I'm going to link it up here, I think, and I will link it down below in the description as well. But the point is, if they want to see the way you write, they will ask you to write something on a relevant topic to them. However, the point is, the more experience you have, so for example, if you have a PhD, the less likely you are that they are going to ask you to write something for them, especially within regulatory medical writing, because regulatory is much more structured and less about creativity and having that writer's flair and trying to grasp someone's attention, because regulatory writing is about informing the reader, informing FDA about the drug and what the drug does and so on. So it's quite different in that sense. However, for example, if you just have masters and you want to break into regulatory medical writing, even though you work for a company and you want to move internally to the medical writing position, they will still ask you to provide a piece of writing. So I know someone who did exactly that. Then when I was applying for medical writing jobs, I was asked to provide a piece of writing for every medical writing role I applied for within medical communications. However, this wasn't the case for every role that I applied for within regulatory medical writing. So for my current job, they actually didn't ask me to provide a piece of writing, and they only asked me a couple of questions about writing, so I still remember them. One of them was about why, my motivation, why do I want to become a medical writer, and the other one was how I would approach writing a document with someone else together. And to be honest, they really didn't care about my papers or anything. But what came useful at this point was that I published a review with my master student back in the day. So I literally described to them how me and my master student wrote a literature review together, how we worked on it together. And I think, they were very pleased with this. At the same time, when I applied, also a colleague of mine applied and he just finished his PhD. He didn't have any academic experience, like any extra academic experience like I had, and also didn't have any papers or grants written like I have. So all he had was just his thesis, but they still didn't ask him to write any pieces, okay? However, they asked him way more questions about writing than they asked me. Now, I don't remember what kind of questions they asked him, but I can tell you that the more confident they are in your writing skills, the less likely it is that they will ask you to provide a writing piece, or they will ask you questions about writing itself. So I think that's really important. But that only applies, I think, to regulatory and doesn't apply so much to communications. So if you want to become a medical writer within a communications agency and you're going to write for marketing or for educational purposes, then you will have to have a flair, you will have to show that creative streak, right? A bit of personality in your writing and so on. So here they will need to see that the way you write, the way you express yourself is going to match the overall touch that the company has, right? Because whatever the company produces needs to be consistent. So you can think about it as, the writing personality, and you need to match this writing personality. So perhaps you might be a great writer, but you just don't write exactly the way they want you to write. And this is why you may not be a great fit. However, if you don't have a PhD, if you maybe just have masters and you're trying to get into medical writing, or you have masters and a few years of experience within the industry, they will still likely ask you for a piece of writing. And if it's medical agency, they will look for one thing where they will want to see your creativity. And if you apply for regulatory roles, they will more sort of look for the fact that you can express information very clearly, concisely. You will work with, complex scientific data. You'll be able to analyze it. So it's different, and to me, regulatory medical writing comes much more in a much more natural manner because I'm a very much a scientist at heart. I like analyzing data. I like thinking about data and then describing it in a clear and concise manner. So I definitely prefer to write to inform people rather than to spark some emotions in them. Like imagine if you were a medical writer within marketing, that you would definitely have to spark emotions within people to feel like, oh yes, I want to spend money on this. I want to buy this drug. I think to summarize what I told you, it's useful to have a PhD, but you definitely don't need to have it. And you definitely don't need to have a portfolio. However, if you write as a freelancer and you apply for these roles, then this will be definitely in your favor. They will probably ask you fewer questions about writing. Maybe they will not ask you at all about providing a piece of writing because they will already see, they will be able to look up online how you write, will be happy with this. So it might make your life much easier. It might make it much more straightforward getting the job. However, all in all, what I think you really need to do is you need to network. Because remember, part of the job is writing. The other part of the job is working with people, right? Being friendly, showing that you're collaborative, that you can be relied on, that you can go above and beyond for the client. That's something that we really want to see. And you're going to help your colleagues, and you will always be professional. And and they can send you out there in a room with a client, and you will not scare the client away. Unfortunately, that's the truth. Like we really need to see that you are client friendly and client approved. And this is not something we can test very well for during the interview because after all, the interview is going to be just an hour, maybe an hour and a half. We will get a feel about what kind of a person you are, right? But they don't really know you. However, if you are friends with someone who works in that department, within the medical writing department, they can vouch for you. So when they might not be able to create a position for you, an open position for you, that's very unlikely. However, when the business need arises and the company opens a new medical writing position, then your friend can go to the hiring manager and tell them, look, I know this person and I can vouch for them. I think they're very reliable. They will be very, very good for this job. And this will really give you a massive advantage over everyone else. That extra credit of trust can really go far. So if you're going to do anything when you're applying for your medical writing jobs, then absolutely you need to do your research about the companies, what they do. You really need to know how the drug development works, right? The whole drug life cycle. That's really important. But what you also need to do, instead of trying to become a freelancer, talk to people, make friends with people. This should be your first priority. And then, as a second priority, you could become a freelancer. You could start writing for journals, websites, whatever, to showcase your writing style. However, what is really important here is that if you're later going to apply for a regulatory position, a company that produces regulatory documents like clinical study reports and protocols and some CTD modules, they will really not care about your academic research. Like they didn't care, actually, they didn't care about my academic papers. They will not care about your scientific communications on, on popular websites, because all they care about is whether you can or you cannot write these clinical study protocols and reports and CTD modules. So this is really important. If you apply for a communications agency, on the other hand, then they might actually care about, whatever you write online on websites, because it might be relevant, because it will show that you have creativity, you have a touch to your writing. Don't worry about the fact that you don't have a PhD. If you do, great, but it's not a big deal. Don't worry about creating a portfolio. Focus on making connections, making friends with people who are medical writers that work for companies that you would like to work for. And I'm sure you'll be absolutely fine. So if you benefit from this content, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.